Okay. So in advance, I apologize for myself, because I tend to get into these kinds of places where, like, sometimes I'll get really tired of an emotional state, and especially when God gives me the message and he's like, the message is about despair tonight, and I'm just like,
Great!
great.
It's like, might as well just go on my own and talk to myself.
Yeah. So that's our thing for tonight, despair, and I don't have the somberness in me to do it like typically would be. So forgive me in advance. Basically, for tonight, the discussion on despair looks something like this. The reality of what it is, and also like where it comes to fore with us, because it always does. And there's a reality attached to it that a lot of us don't really appreciate or understand. Like, usually when somebody says despair, we think of like sadness. But the correct definition and the best description of the word despair is the utter loss of hope. So, a lot of times when we talk about despair, we're not really appreciating the gravity of what the word means or what it's intended to display. Also, it's something that we routinely kind of run into. I mean, the church is really bad about this. And it goes a lot deeper than it just being like things get hard and we give up. No, we're kind of like programmed to sit in a place of constant despair, especially when we talk about God. So when we talk about things... Okay, show of hands. When we talk about things pertaining to what needs to change in your life, how many of you take that as something that you have to do?
Yeah.
That's what first hits me, like,
Yeah.
I gotta problem solve,
Exactly.
figure this out.
I wish that I had that
Make
kind
some
of
changes.
faith in myself.
Right.
No,
Everybody-
it's bad.
That's the thing, though, is
Never
like
actually works.
we're conditioned to live an existence of constant self-improvement. And while there's value in that, there's also a very, very destructive side. See,
It's shaking.
yeah, my foot's up against the table,
Okay.
and I'm like doing stuff.
Fidgety.
I'm fidgety. I think I had too much caffeine. Anyway, we're preconditioned to believe this whole thing that everything's our fault. Like, I remember listening to my American history teacher back in high school make fun of Americans because he was Welsh, and he would talk about our puritanical roots. We live in a shame culture. I mean, I've talked about this before as part of this group. We basically exist in a constant state of thinking that we need to do better and that everything is under our control. And that's especially true for Christians. Like, in America, that's normal. Okay? So we're already standing there, and then you add on to it the cross and the blood and the Old Testament that we take and we live under. Because the truth of the matter is that one of the biggest problems with Christianity is that most of us are still living under the Old Covenant. See, the Old Covenant was a visitation culture. Basically, God said, I'm going to set up my home in Israel, and I want the Hebrew people to be my people, and I want them to draw everybody to me, show them, be a light on the top of the hill. There's this little sliver of land, this is my promised land. Bring everybody here so they can meet me and know me, and I can save the world. It didn't work. At the end of the day, you can talk about, like, there is a specificity in that the Jewish religion did spread, but it required the Assyrian Empire rolling in, conquering the northern half of Israel, and taking all the people there and dispersing them throughout the Assyrian Empire. That was how God was able to reach the expanse of the world, not because the Jews went out and did their job, but because events had to transpire to force them. So God's will was done, it's just he had to go about a way of raising up an enemy and allowing them free rein to conquer a portion of his people. And this is stuff that he talks about in, I believe it's Isaiah, where he talks about raising up Cyrus and different leaders of other nations. I know he talks about Cyrus of Persia and raising him up in Isaiah 45. We don't really take stock of that, the way that God had to actually do that. But for whatever reason, we continue to kind of exist in this place where when we talk about church and we kind of look at the church and try to exist on our relationship with God, we keep looking at the Old Testament as an example of how we're supposed to live. And that's not where we're supposed to be. Jesus didn't die and resurrect so that we could stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, he did this so that we could move into what's called a habitation culture. An existence where we understand that if we are followers of Jesus and we're saved, the Holy Spirit exists with us all the time. So, your proximity to God is not incumbent on whether or not you do a good job. You can be the worst person, absolutely the trashiest, most disgusting, disreputable human being, and God will still be right there. You don't have to go find him. You don't have to ask him to come visit you. You don't have to beg him and plead him to show up. He's there. But we don't live that way. Like, I catch myself all the time asking God to just show up. And what's worse is when things get hard. That's especially true. See, we're already standing on a very, 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 very shaky ground. And as a result of that, we don't have faith. We don't have any faith whatsoever when it comes down to it. Then things get hard and we've got that same shaky ground with nothing to it. Our foundations are made of sand and the tide's coming in. And then we get mad at God for not showing up. And we want him to prove himself by showing up. Like, it gets to a point where we get frustrated with him, get sick and tired of him not answering our prayers or whatever, and then we finally get to a point where we say, fine, show up, prove yourself to me. You know what God doesn't do? Prove himself. He doesn't dance for us, okay? And this is something, like, you can even look at the example of Jesus so many times throughout the scriptures where the Pharisees came to him saying, hey, show us a sign that you're the Messiah. They would come to him with this after he had just finished healing a ton of people or performing some crazy miracle. And they would still show up and be like, okay, prove yourself. And Jesus would be like, no, I don't do that for you.
He doesn't have to.
Exactly. And this is one of the big issues that we run into. See, we are a transactional society. And this is a problem for us because when we start looking at a being that stands outside of that and doesn't actually have to redeem our good deeds, when we find somebody that's completely sovereign and free of that, we run into a problem because suddenly we're doing all this work and putting in all this effort and we're thinking that we're doing so good and we deserve to be rewarded. And the problem with that is that that's entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
See, if I do lots of good things for anybody, do I deserve for them to treat me better as a result? It's an arguable thing. Culturally, yes, absolutely. In America, in most of Western civilization, if you do good things for other people, then you have earned the right to have good things done back to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true everywhere. Like, that's a mentality that we carry in our culture, but that's not true in every culture. And on top of that, some of the good deeds that you do might actually be insulting in other cultures. If you try to one of the best examples is in Asia, like in China specifically. If you, yeah, I mean, there's that, but more so, it's praise. In our country, in our culture, it's oftentimes a big deal to praise people, praise them for their good work, tell them how good of a job they did. In some cultures, that's actually not okay. What you're doing, they'll respond by being humble, by trying to feign humility in a way where they just say, no, I'm not that good, I'm not that smart, I'm not that, no, stop. Because it's not acceptable in their culture. So we have different cultures and different kind of ways that people exist, but because of our culture and our purview and our limited perspective, we presume that everybody's the same way. So then we're looking at God, and he's not American. Like, shock!
He also is not white, like we see in every photo of him.
Whoa.
Yeah, come on. I thought you mean
Whoa.
Jesus.
Whoa. Shame. Check yourself. We're having church group right now. I don't know what you're doing over there. So the thing that we run into here is like this, all of this kind of like pre-programmed stuff. And now there's a clash of cultures where we're looking to God and expecting him to, fulfill our transactions, and then he doesn't. And that just pisses people off at the end of the day. So we talk about despair, okay? Because despair is really, really easy when we're coming to this being and we're trying to be good enough for him and we're not getting our transactions met. And mind you, the thing about this is that for the one thing that I need to specify and clarify very, very clearly, don't presume that because you are in this boat and that these things might be true of you, that you're wrong. Okay? One of the problems that we run into is, again, we're a shame culture. So when somebody comes up and shares a message and says, hey, this is something that's wrong, that's off with us, and it's a system that's in place, we take personal responsibility for it and say, man, I'm such a terrible person, I should do better, and blah, 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 blah. Which is the exact opposite of what you need to do with this. Because if you just take something like this and beat yourself over the head with it, it doesn't do anything. It's shocking. You just stay in the same place and you create this kind of the same idea that you're not good enough. And that's not true. If you weren't good enough, Jesus wouldn't have died for you or been resurrected for you. It never would have happened. God wouldn't have wasted his time if he didn't see value in us. But he wanted to create a new way for us to live because the old way wasn't working. We just made it this weird like club thing. And we still do that because we're still living under that old way. So, onto the point, and a lot of what I was given here, I mean, aside from all that, we need to be patient with ourselves because this kind of programming thing is something that's so deeply ingrained. It's not something that you're simply going to say, oh, I need to change my perspective. Then you're going to go to sleep, and you're going to wake up in the morning, and you're probably not going to remember some portions of this until later on when you catch it. But it's so normal that it's going to be a process of catching this stuff again and again and again. Because again, it's normal. When you exist inside of a specific culture that does specific things, a lot of things become normal, even things that are tragic or terrible. Things that might be unacceptable in the world at large. And the truth of the matter is that you don't, unless you have something that's constantly pointing that out, you're not going to recognize that you're doing it even. So there's a place for us to be very, very patient with ourselves moving forward as, again, I use the word programming because it's what it is. You were raised this way, you were taught this way. I mean, the truth is that there are probably enough people in this group right now when I talk about the transaction thing who are just like, no, but that's right. Of course you think it's right. It's what you're raised with. It's the same way that, like, I mean, I was reading a thing the other day, and it was talking about weird things about America that nobody notices. Do you know that our highest paid government employees are college or coaches for college football?
Yeah.
That's a government employee?
Government employees, yes. So they are paid. We have in America, and this is America, all us. We pay college football coaches with government funding through certain colleges. And as a result, they make a lot of money. The President of the United States makes something like a quarter, if even that, of the amount of money that the coach of, I think it's the Beavers, or maybe it's the Ducks. I can't remember quite which one it is.
Probably the Ducks, I would assume.
But yeah.
And then they pay teachers.
They win.
I think his price, or the amount he was paid, just went up even. I was reading it just the other, because when I heard all these things, I'm just like, what? That's just not even true. And then I went and looked it up. I'm like, that's true.
That's crazy.
Okay. Oh, also, in America, we're the only country in the world where with a really high number of people getting shot by toddlers
Like toddlers?
every year.
Oh my word.
That's why there are school shootings a lot.
Not school shootings.
Toddlers.
This is literally
Huh?
baby.
They're not going to school
Baby
yet?
found
Oh.
Papa's gun and pulled the trigger.
Oh my word.
It happens in our country on a routine basis, and we don't even know.
Nobody talks about that, really.
Well, no, it's-
shocks me.
It's not a big deal. In
What?
in Britain, this would make national news. In America, no one bats an eye.
Yeah.
But that's the point that I'm trying to convey here, is just the reality of like how many things, like there are things that are so normal for us, we don't even care. But in other countries, they're just like, you guys are weird. And we don't realize that.
We're like desensitized.
Right. And we're desensitized, we're programmed. There's so much here. So when we talk about God and acknowledge that, okay, maybe he's not quite American.
He's also not a Christian.
I'm really gonna have a problem with this part of your sermon.
Right.
Expect 20 more messages.
No, for sure. For sure. Everyone's gonna, this is something that has to be dealt with. Like,
Evangelical Christian.
it's just one of those things that we have to face and even appreciate. Like, God's on a different level than us, but also he's weird. Okay, he doesn't follow all of our cultural norms. So we run into this thing where we can despair so easily in response to him not doing what we think he's supposed to do, because according to us, that's the way it's supposed to be. So what happens is, and it works in kind of like twofold here, because I have to kind of, we have to address two different kind of camps of people in this group. And the truth is, it's that way with the church at large anyways, so it's not like this is being completely lost. Like, there are a lot of people who don't really they don't hear from God. Okay? So the idea of God being quiet isn't really a big deal. Because the truth is, most of those people are accustomed to the idea of kind of having to figure this out for themselves anyways. So they'll lean on the Bible, they'll lean on the sermons that they hear, they'll lean on anything that they can to kind of draw on and say, well, this is God's way. Because they can't, for whatever reason, they're not able to approach him and say, how's this supposed to work? What do you want me to do?
Yeah, there's no like inner conversation. Well,
Right.
there is, but it's with ourselves or.
Right. And that's the thing. So,
They're both things, yes.
yeah. So when you hear that, like God's being quiet, that's not really a big deal. It may even just be a point of frustration because maybe you really want him to talk to you and he's not. Or maybe he is and you can't hear it for some reason, which is a whole other thing that we will talk about a little bit later. So, but it's really easy to run in despair then, because what happens when you run into like a moral quandary and you have nothing to go off of. All you have is the Bible, and if you know it really well, maybe you're able to find something that you can kind of like jimmy rig the meaning of to fit your circumstance. Or maybe you don't, and maybe you can't, and you're just left adrift. And all that you have now is that things are hard and you don't know why, but you're doing the best you can. And things are still hard. And you keep trying, and you keep praying, and you keep doing everything that you can think to do, and everything that you know to do, and it's still hard, and it's not getting better. How are you supposed to maintain hope in that kind of situation? In that circumstance? That's a lonely place. It's the kind of thing where you feel like you're that you're leaning over, bending down on a wounded knee every single time that you go to pray, and you just keep having faith and keep trying to have faith, and it's not getting you anywhere. And our programming says that if you do things, you're supposed to get something. But God isn't playing by that rule. He's not fulfilling your faith. He's not rewarding your faith. All that you end up being left with is either you have to now figure this out for yourself, or or maybe he's not real. Maybe he's not there. Maybe he doesn't care about you. Maybe you've done something wrong. And then the litany of different things just runs through as you're left with just that. Silence. And the agony of things not going the way that you think they should. The other camp are the people that do hear from God. And that can ultimately be the same, because what happens when he gets quiet? Like for those people, that's weird. The moment that God stops talking to you, you start wondering what you did. What did I do did I upset you? Like did I offend you? Did I chase you away?
Did you forget about me?
Did you forget about me?
Yeah.
Have I done something? Or he won't even talk about the thing that you want to talk about. It's like, hey, there's this glaring elephant in the room type of thing going on over here. Can you please talk to me about that? Actually, I want to talk to you about this other thing that's not even remotely attached to it. No! No, I'm over here! And I'm over here.
We think God has ADHD.
But this is a big deal right now. I know. But I want to talk about this. I don't. And then there we go. And that's it. And we get so frustrated because he's not meeting us where we think he needs to go. And it can end up feeling the same way. And just to be clear, like there's a place to validate the feelings here. Again, like we talk about this whole thing, and it's really funny because for those who hear from God, we have a tendency to get really hard on ourselves in that boat too, because number one, we will think back to all the times that God has shown up, right? All the times that he's done things, crazy events, crazy miracles, where he's spoken words to us. But it's like we have goldfish memory, which isn't fair to goldfish because they actually have better memories than the 10 seconds that we have.
We give credit to them.
Right. But we'll totally just like, because this season right now is hard, we'll brush aside everything that God has done for us and been everywhere he's been for us, just to feel abandoned. And I need to specify one thing, that to live in despair is a choice that we make. And again, that can seem very condemning. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in just a moment. But it is a thing that we do make a choice on, because we have to choose between having faith or not. And that is on us in a lot of ways. But it's not to say that it's shameful or pathetic or anything like that, where we like to go to criticize ourselves. Because directly relating to what I'm talking about right here, where like for those who hear from God, they'll completely give up hope in the face of hard times in order to believe in nothingness and believe that they're abandoned or they're not good enough, or whatever it is that we go with to believe, instead of that God's actually right there with us. Think about the way that the Israelites there are so many stories in the Bible that are just people who had God right there and they still freaked out. It's whether it's Moses or it's David or it's the entire nation of Israel multiple times. I mean, you talk about like the desert and the way that God was showing up. He was literally leading them every day. God appeared to them as a pillar of fire at night to lead them through the desert, and as a pillar of cloud in the daytime to lead them through the desert personally. God was personally there, but they were still having moments of thinking that he didn't care about them. I mean, we look at that kind of stuff and scoff, but then we do the same thing on a routine basis. And it's not to say that this is all just human beings being stupid and petty and pathetic. It is simply to say that this is what it's like to be human. This is a normal part of being a human. We don't have it all together like we like to pretend we do. And probably one of the most important things, I would argue, one of the most important things for existing in this world and being comfortable with it is accepting that you don't have control over everything. And then living with that. Because you're never going to. And it's really easy, and that's the thing, is when we obsess over control, that's probably the greatest catalyst for us to move into a place of absolute despair. What happens when you give it everything you've got, you fight your hardest, you pour yourself into whatever scenario, every single situation, and you still keep losing? Do you lose hope? Because your hope is in you and your abilities to conquer this world around you, to control your own fate, to control what's happening. And you can't. You honestly can't. You can go a long ways, but eventually you're going to run into a wall, and that wall is called life, and it's made out of bricks and pain. And it's going to win because it's stronger than you. Okay? But we're preconditioned to believe otherwise. Again, I start this off by talking about this foundation that we exist on, because it really does bleed into so many different things. And it sucks. That whole thing, your foundation, has a significant impact on your ability to handle all this other stuff that we're talking about. It doesn't matter whether you're in the church or not. If you're conditioned this way, it's how you're going to function. And then when you run into that wall, it's going to suck. It's going to suck bad. And you're going to suffer. And then you're going to keep fighting because all that you can do is think that, well, I just have to go around it this way, or I have to overcome this hurdle, or I have to do this. In my hands, I have the power to make the world a better place, and then you don't. Instead, you keep running into that same wall, and it keeps stopping you, and then you're stuck. And then you lose hope, because you can't control it. And that's where you find, where I've met a lot of people who they run into things. That's where, this person started drinking, or this person fell into some other addiction, and coping mechanisms become a big deal. Because all that you can feel is the despair. You've lost hope now, and you're sitting in that place of utter darkness, and the feelings are painful, and really none of us really like to feel pain, so we're going to cope with it somehow, any way that we can, other than to feel it. And the truth of the matter is you can only handle so much before it gets the better of you. So, oh yeah, and speaking of like people and the whole thing about people running away from things, and just to kind of like give a further perspective of how human this is, I think probably the best example story, like we can talk about the Israelites watching Goliath come out and mock Israel and God, and them cowering. I mean, realistically, they could have all just opened fire with their arrows at one time and just peppered him to death, but they didn't. Instead, they cowered because he was a giant or something. I don't get it. The point is that that was where they existed. Despair was a thing. In probably another classic example is, I believe it's Elijah, who was the one that went up on the mountain. And, we've told the story about the prophets of Baal and Elijah, and how they have this crazy, crazy event where Elijah goes up and basically says, okay, y'all get your God, bring him to the mountain. We're going to set up a couple of altars, and we're going to see whose God is real. So the prophets of Baal are like over there trying to summon Baal to take their offering, and they're cutting themselves and all this other stuff, and the whole time Elijah's just teasing them about it. Until finally he prays, and then God sends fire down to take up the whole offering that he had. And then he prays, and God takes their offering too. And then it's like the next day, and he hears that the queen of Israel, Jezebel, wants him dead. He literally just coming off the back of this crazy event where God was right there and did this wild thing, and his first response is to panic and run off into the woods and lose all hope and hide in a cave.
Yeah, faith highs and lows.
It's how we are.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that we can either continue to beat ourselves up over it, or we can accept it, acknowledge it, and then maybe move on for real, instead of pinning ourselves down in a place, because that's what happens with shame. Okay.
I totally thought you said Shane.
Me too. Fucking shame, man.
So, again, I say that just to clarify the point that this is human. Okay? It's the way it is, and like I said, you can beat yourself up over it, but that doesn't actually get you anywhere. See, when we beat ourselves up, the fun thing about despair, when we lose hope in things, is that we can very easily fall into that same place of self-criticism and shame and all those different things, and guilt. And as a result of that, it becomes this wild and crazy melting pot of terrible, and it sends us into a hole. And as a result of that, it's not enough that you already feel hopeless, but then to beat yourself up for feeling hopeless, or to beat yourself up because of situations around your feelings of hopelessness. That's great. It's such a good way to go about it, guys, for real. And we all do it. Every single one of us. But it's not really the way to go. And there is a better way. And even though this is a normal thing, this is normal, don't kill yourself for being normal. Okay? I don't know why we all like to think that we're different in this regard. Even just to be real, show of hands for anybody who gets hard on themselves when they screw up or when they lose hope. That was pretty much everybody in the room. So,
Not Dusty though. She's Joss.
No.
Dusty is fearless. Tea Joss.
Yeah, Bruce Lee.
So if this is all of us, pretty much, let's talk about the other side of it. Because at the end of the day, I feel like there's just too much, there's too much condemnation over all of this.
We should take a break before you get to the good part.
No!
That was a lot to process.
Yeah, well, we're going to process a little bit more,
Okay.
so buckle up.
Dang it. Just and then you said that.
So much darkness.
You shouldn't call him Buttercup.
No, I said buckle up.
I know.
So, I'm going to keep going. Anyway,
Sorry.
how do we get past this? Because it feels pretty dark, right? Like there's a lot of condemnation there. There's a lot of, you should be doing better, and blah, blah, blah. Stop. You shouldn't be doing better. Okay. Like I said multiple times now, this is normal. Every person does this. Again, first off, recognize the programming part of this. The idea that your control is what's going to lead you through. Okay. Now that we've firmly grasped that for a moment, because it doesn't take long, let it go. In our understanding of the Bible, so many times we hear things about trusting in God over and over and over again. We put our faith in God to lead us through, right? See, the thing about God that's fascinating and fun is that he supersedes our abilities. This may come as a shock to everybody, but it's true. And with that, he has a way of being able to knock down those walls of life that we come up against and can't overcome ourselves. But what it comes down to is an issue of whether or not we trust God. And as we've talked about, we've already been conditioned not to. Whether you don't believe or not, it doesn't matter. Even most believers sit in the same place where we're conditioned to believe that it's going to be through our goodness that we're going to achieve heaven. And that's not really true. Not in the sense that we understand it, at least. Your good deeds matter, don't get me wrong. And just to validate that, like making the choice to be good matters a lot. But it's more about where your heart's at. See, if I'm the kind of person who I do lots of good things because I want to win my way into heaven, I've completely missed the point. Because I'm not doing it because I want to be a good person. I'm not doing it because I actually want to be close to God. I'm doing it because I want to get a place. I want my transaction to be validated. I've put in this investment. It's accruing wealth. I'm making it work. And now I'm supposed to get what I put in for. No one's entitled to heaven. Ever, for any reason. We're all invited. Like, it's a fascinating thing because we feel like we have to work for something that we already have. It's kind of like I don't have a good analogy. It just is what it is. It's, you already have this. If you've accepted Jesus into your heart, which just looks like believing in him, okay? Then you're already headed in that direction. You don't need to win the day. But what's going to be hard is that place of trusting in that and trusting him specifically, especially when the world around us has convinced us that we're supposed to work for it. See, we talk about like transformational stuff, and I've talked about this a couple different times over the last few weeks, but it's this whole concept that when we pray, we try to take on our transformation as something that we're going to do. And that's part of why when we get into places of despair, it turns into, what do I need to do to make God talk to me again? What do I need to do to be better? What did I do? It's why we fall into that loop. It's because we think that it's on us, and in reality it's not. Like, just recognizing that you have something that needs to change is enough. And like I was talking about last week, we have to kind of face that monster and even be willing to let that go. And that's not always easy. And that's okay. But moving forward, there's a place where we need to transition from a life of expecting God to visit us or going to visit Him, and move into a place of recognizing that He's always there. We talk about God's omnipresence, but none of us lives like He's omnipresent. We live like we have to find Him, or we have to get Him to come visit us. And that's just not true. For any one of us at any point in time, who are in Christ, we have access to Him at any point in time. We just don't really see that or appreciate that, which means it's really easy to feel alone. Because if God's joy in you, or appreciation of you, or His time with you is incumbent on you doing a good job, that's a lonely place. Because again, to kind of like bring everything full circle here, the normal circumstance of life as a human being is that you don't have control over everything, and you're going to run into things that are beyond your control. And you can't win. You're going to run into things that are going to beat you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But if you can't accept that that's okay, you're going to twist this around into a reason for God not to love you, and for you not to love yourself. And that's a desperately lonely place. Because then everybody's against you. Everybody who you could be leaning on for help is against you. So these systems are things that we need to be free of, because they're only going to continue to manufacture despair. It's too easy to lose hope in our own strength. It's too easy to lose hope in our ability to follow rules all the time perfectly. You can only go so far with that. And that's when you have to accept grace, and we have kind of an issue with grace. And in those times when God is quiet, where we're not getting what we think we should have, or that we think we want. And there's a whole other paradigm to this too, where sometimes what it boils down to is that it's not where we need to be, or what we need. We always say these prayers of, God, if you want me to have this, give me this. And then if He says no, we freak. But God, you were supposed to. But God, I wanted this. But God... Look, if you look at somebody and tell them, it's your choice whether I have this or not, do you think this is best for me? And they say no, because they're seeing it from a perspective other than yours, and they're seeing this is dangerous for you. You've already put control in their hands and said make a choice. So it's hardly fair for us to freak out on that person when they don't give us the thing that we really, really want, even though we told them it was their choice. And this is something that we run into a lot in Christianity. Like, there are a lot of people who are very angry at God for not meeting them in a place when they had a need or a want or whatever. Maybe that need or that want was dangerous. I know I've had issues in the past where I've had a lot of bitterness towards God for not providing me with the path forward when I wanted to be a zoologist. I met constant issues. All the stuff I'm talking about relating to that wall of life, yeah, that was college and work and money, and how none of those things existed in enough quantity, or none of those things gave me enough time to fulfill my role of succeeding in college. And as a result of that, I was very offended with God and very angry for a long, long time, because I thought that he had robbed me of my dream job, my career, the thing that I wanted from the time I was a 3-year-old. In retrospect, though, having met scientists, talked to scientists, been involved in the scientific community in different ways, I'm glad he didn't give me that, because I would have been miserable. And that's something that's taken years for me to see and appreciate. So it's easy in those places. It's like, the truth of the matter is that when we're standing next to God, we're all just children who have wants and things that we think are going to be best for us. And that's the way that we stand next to him. And that's hard for us to appreciate sometimes, because we have real hard things in life that we're trying to deal with. And as a result, we don't see things fully. Oftentimes we can get such tunnel vision that we can completely miss why this is actually bad for us. But we want it so bad, or we need it so bad. And that's not to undercut some of the stuff that some of the things that people are going through, where they have like legitimate painful things that they're struggling with. It's simply to say that maybe there's a perspective you're lacking. And maybe there's not. Maybe you see it completely clearly, and there's just some other stuff to it. But in my experience, it's usually the former. Usually we're overvaluing something that we feel is important. So, this ends up being the thing, just to kind of, again, I've already brought it all full circle, but just to clarify this thing. Despair is when we lose hope. And there's a lot of conditioning that we have that's built in to put us in a situation where it's easy for us to despair. Our entire culture is built on it. We're crafted, molded, and our little ships are built and set in a direction. It's off of a waterfall. And this is something where we need to be deprogrammed. We need to be healed from this, because it will continue to set us up in this way. And it's not your fault. It's not you weren't bad because you didn't see it. It's just the way it is. But there's a new way, there's been a new way for a long time. And that's the direction for us to go, as if we want out. But whether or not we want out, it's a decision that we have to make. Truth is that some of us, we get really comfortable in despair. And we get really comfortable in these mindsets. You know, we talked about pride a lot over the last couple of weeks specifically. But I go back to that because it's that point of thinking that we don't need change. All evidence to the contrary is right here. But still, a lot of us will stand on that. It's fine. But the option is available here. And it is a way forward, it is a way out. And there's a new life for us that's meant to be, that's been bought and paid for. And it's been laid out for us so clearly. It's just, we kind of muddied the waters a little bit. but it's time to rise above them. And that's what I got.